Okay, let's try and unpack this puzzle. You see someone, maybe Gen Z, scrolling TikTok, right? Videos get like maybe 2 seconds. Then they swipe.
Fast.
But then later, that same person, totally absorbed in, I don't know, a 45-minute YouTube deep dive or reading a super long article.
Yeah, it seems like a total contradiction.
It really does. And that contradiction, well, that's pretty much what we're diving into today, isn't it?
Exactly. We're digging into this really complex relationship. You've got Gen Z, social media, this ever-present FOMO, fear of missing out. And then how does it all actually hit their performance, their focus, their well-being?
Right. And we're basing this whole deep dive on a whole stack of stuff a listener sent over. Research papers, articles, even just notes from discussions. They really wanted to get behind the headlines. You know?
Understand what's really going on. So our mission basically is to unpack all these sources, find the crucial insights, and help you, the listener, get a genuinely informed perspective on this whole thing.
Okay, let's start with FOMO then. It's a term we hear all the time. What do the sources actually say it is? And why might Gen Z feel it so strongly?
So the research suggests it's like more than just wishing you were somewhere else. It's described more as this underlying anxiety, a fear you're missing out on something important, trends, news, experiences others are having.
And social media fuels this.
Massively. It's often triggered by what they see online. That little nagging feeling of dissatisfaction when it looks like everyone else is doing something cooler or more useful than you are.
Right. So less about one specific party, more like a constant background hum of maybe not measuring up based on feeds.
Exactly. And the sources actually tie this back to some pretty fundamental psychology. One mentioned Maslow, suggesting FOMO connects to core needs like belonging, relatedness, self-esteem. It's driven hard by social comparison.
Ah, the comparison trap.
Totally. Seeing those curated, often idealized lives online and, well, measuring your own against it. Often coming up short,
That feels like something everyone deals with now. But the research specifically points to Gen Z being like extra prone to it. Why is that?
Well, they're the first true digital natives, right?
Yeah.
They didn't just adopt the internet, they grew up in it. It's just the air they breathe.
Okay.
And the sources highlight a few things. They talk about under-influence, like a real dependency on tech, being always connected, which is often tied to needing acceptance. And this digital intuitiveness, like they just get online trends, almost predict them.
So because they're so immersed.
Exactly. That constant immersion puts them right in the path of FOMO triggers constantly. Yeah. And another key point from the research, if those basic psychological needs, especially the social ones, aren't fully met offline in the real world,
they look for it online even more.
That's what the sources suggest. It can drive them to be even more constantly engaged online. That persistent need to be plugged in, the fear of missing the conversation or the next big thing, that's a huge part of FOMO for this generation.
Okay, that makes sense as a backdrop. So let's talk consequences. What do the sources say are the actual impacts of all this? Let's start with mental health.
Yeah, the sources are pretty consistent here, and it's concerning. They link high FOMO and heavy social media use to increased anxiety, depression, stress.
Okay.
Also lower self-confidence, paradoxically, more loneliness despite being connected, and just general fatigue. Burnout, almost.
How does just scrolling lead to like actual depression or anxiety? It feels like there's a mechanism there.
There is. The comparison engine is a big one. Constantly seeing these filtered, perfect-looking lives, it can really erode your own sense of self-worth. Feelings of inadequacy creep in.
Right.
The sources point to that relentless comparison as a major trigger for anxiety and depression. And then there's just the sheer mental load, the cognitive and emotional weight of feeling you have to be online, always checking. Totally exhausting.
Yeah.
It creates this background hum of dissatisfaction, contributes to that fatigue. And one source even mentioned it can cause real friction, conflict, jealousy in their offline relationships too.
Wow. So it really spills over. Okay, beyond well-being, what about focus, performance, like at school or work?
Another major theme in the sources. It connects directly. Excessive social media use. Repeatedly linked to lower productivity and real difficulty concentrating on things that need focus.
Because their attention is split.
Exactly. The constant lure of notifications, the urge to just quickly check. Attention gets fragmented. And for someone with high FOMO, it's even worse. They struggle to stay on task because there's this powerful pull to see what they might be missing online.
We used to just call that multitasking, didn't we? But it's not really effective.
No, the research says pretty clearly. Trying to juggle demanding tasks like Studying with checking social media. It doesn't work well. They use similar brain resources. You're not doing both at once. You're just switching back and forth really fast.
And that switching has a cost.
Absolutely. They call it switch costs in the sources. Every single time you interrupt yourself to glance at your phone, even for a second, and then try to get back to work, there's a hit.
Like you lose your train of thought.
Yeah, and more. It takes mental effort to re-engage. You actually become slower, and you're more likely to make mistakes when you return to the original task. The more you do this kind of constant switching, the research suggests, the harder it gets to maintain focus for any extended period.
And the platforms themselves kind of nudge you towards that switching, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. It's by design. Features like infinite scroll, personalized algorithms, those little red notification dots, it's all engineered to keep you scrolling, keep you engaged.
To create that flow state they mentioned.
Exactly. A flow state that's really hard to break out of. That constant engineered pull makes sustained focus on other things incredibly challenging, especially for heavy users.
Okay, this leads to something really interesting the sources brought up, this Gen Z content paradox. We hear the stereotype all the time, right? Gen Z has an 8-second attention span.
Right, that old chestnut.
But the research here really pushes back on that, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
And it's like a super important distinction. Just saying they have short attention spans, it misses the point entirely. Sure, they might scroll through a feed incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
But the sources show they are absolutely capable of deep, sustained engagement with content if they think it's valuable. The length itself isn't the main issue.
So the speed is more like a rapid filter, not a limitation.
That's a great way to put it. One source talked about value perception being the real filter. They scroll fast, assessing constantly. When something hits, feels relevant, authentic, interesting, they stop. And they'll stay regardless of length if the value is there.
Is there solid data on that?
Yeah, definitely. Some interesting points in the sources, like Gen Z can have surprisingly high recall for super short ads, even under 2 seconds. So they're processing info fast.
Wow.
And they often use short-form stuff, like TikToks or Shorts, as a jumping-off point. They see a quick clip, it sparks interest, and then they'll actively seek out and watch a long documentary or an in-depth video on the topic.
Ah, so short form can be discovery for long form.
Exactly. The data mentioned showed over half of Gen Z regularly watches long-form content.
They completely reframes things and explains why, TikTok is allowing longer videos now and YouTube is doing both shorts and its usual longer stuff.
Right. The platforms are adapting. So the key takeaway isn't just make it short. It's more like signal the value instantly. Grab their attention fast. But then make sure you have the substance if they decide to dive deeper.
And authenticity matters more than polish.
Huge point in the sources.
Yeah.
Authenticity often cuts through much better than something that feels overly produced or fake.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Not just how they consume, but how they post. The notes mention something distinctive, often very few public posts on their main feeds compared to, say, millennials.
Yeah, that's a really noticeable difference highlighted in the material. You look at a typical Gen Z main Instagram feed maybe, often pretty sparse.
Why is that? If they're so online, where is all their stuff?
Well, the sources suggest a few things are going on. One is this very conscious curation of the main feed. It's almost like a public resume or an aesthetic portfolio.
Reserved for the highlights.
Pretty much. Big life events or carefully selected photo dumps that fit a specific look. Not so much the everyday, casual updates.
So where does the casual stuff go?
Mostly to stories, those transient 24-hour posts. That's for the daily life, the sillier stuff, the behind the scenes. And they like stories, the sources say, because you see who views them gives a sense of control and they disappear. Less permanent pressure.
Ah, the impermanence is a feature. What about things like Finstas or private accounts?
Very common. Those secondary private accounts, Finstas, spam accounts, whatever they call them, are crucial. That's where they share much more freely, more authentically, but only with a small, trusted group of close friends.
Like an inner circle.
Exactly. It's where they can be themselves without worrying about the judgment of a wider audience or, future employers.
So they're really segmenting their online identity, polished public front, temporary daily life, and then private realness.
That's a good summary. And increasingly, the sources suggest the main social part of social media for them is happening in DMs and group chats. Platforms like WhatsApp, Discord, Snapchat groups, less public broadcasting, more private conversations.
And how does this tie back to the FOMO and anxiety stuff we talked about earlier?
Directly. This cautiousness about posting. It's linked to that heightened self-consciousness, the fear of being judged negatively, being seen as cringy or a try-hard.
Okay.
And there's a massive awareness of their digital footprint. Privacy is a big concern. They know the internet is forever. They've seen older posts cause problems for people later on.
So maybe learning from perceived mistakes of older generations who may be overshared.
That definitely seems to be part of it. There's a sense, mentioned in the discussions, that maybe public social media got less about real connection and more about performing, or that the whole public feed scene just feels kind of whack, as one note put it. So they're way more deliberate about what goes out there permanently.
Okay. So let's try and pull all these threads together then. We've got the FOMO, the mental health strain, the focus issues, this content paradox. They're very specific posting habits. What's the big picture?
I think the main takeaway is just how complex and honestly contradictory Gen Z's relationship with social media is. They're undeniably embedded in it, right? But they're also acutely aware of the downsides.
Which leads to these coping mechanisms.
Exactly. It makes them sophisticated filters of content. They demand value, and it makes them really careful, often quite private, curators of their own online image.
And the negative impacts we discussed, anxiety, focus problems, those are still very real issues linked to how these platforms work.
Oh, absolutely. The challenges to mental health, the struggle with sustained attention. The sources clearly connect these to the addictive design of the platforms, that constant social comparison, and the sheer cognitive burden of being always on and dividing your focus.
But are they finding ways to manage it? Do the sources offer any hope there?
Yeah, there are hints of that. A growing awareness, it seems, that they need to protect their real-world selves, their well-being, from the endless demands of the online world.
Like what kind of strategies?
Things like consciously setting boundaries, especially around tech use when they need to focus, like for work or study. Talking more openly about how social media makes them feel is mentioned too. And crucially, trying to focus on what they can control.
Such as?
Like actively choosing what content to consume, who to follow, who to engage with, maybe limiting time spent scrolling. It's definitely not easy in this environment, but that awareness, that effort to build healthier digital habits, it seems really important.
This has been really illuminating. It definitely paints a picture far beyond just short attention spans. It's about value perception, sophisticated identity management, and grappling with some pretty significant costs.
Absolutely. It's a nuanced picture. And maybe, as we finish up, here's a thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Go on.
Given everything we've discussed, how these platforms are built to hook us, how comparison runs rampant online, the constant drain on our attention, is it possible that maybe all of us, regardless of generation, are dealing with some version of this? Some level of FOMO, fractured focus, pressure to perform online?
That's a really good question.
Yeah. What can we all potentially learn from how Gen Z is navigating, struggling, adapting in this digital world we all now live in? Something to think about.